the talks between the U.S. and Iran are going to be a circus. They have essentially been inaugurated or initiated by Donald Trump's administration. And in lieu of this, though, I wanted to ask you what your view is on how we got to this point. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in these talks, but we do have a record of what the U.S. is like during negotiations. We also have a reality that's being acknowledged by the Western mainstream media, by the political pundit class everywhere. We have the Globe and Mail in Canada talking about how Iran has won, everyone else has lost. We also have the New Republic talking about the Iran war as a staggering humiliation. And we have the New York Times talking about how the war turned Iran into a major world power. So, in this context, Patrick, what exactly is happening here, and what's your overall analysis of the situation?
There's a couple of different dimensions, Daniel. Domestically in the U.S., politically speaking, there's a lot going on. As you probably saw, quite a lot of Democrats signed on to this impeachment initiative against Trump in the House. I think it had 100 lawmakers that sort of weighed in on that. There's no chance that they'll impeach him right now, but however, it is a type of a temperature check for what's coming after the midterms. And it's funny that a lot of Democrats were also told not to support this because if they didn't get a win, if they tried to push for impeachment or invoking the 25th Amendment, meaning that Trump is mentally unfit for office, I think we can all agree that's probably the case. But if they can't actually get that, they're afraid of just basically firing another round without, getting a win or hitting the target. So some of the Democratic leadership were trying to dissuade some of their Democratic colleagues from doing this. So, but still, it's happening. It's there. So that's going on. Now we're into the actual run up for the midterms. The campaigns will begin. And so we know what the results are going to be based on the current polling. It's not looking good for the Republicans, and it's not looking good for Donald Trump afterwards. After November, you're looking at a potential deluge of investigations, of hearings, impeachment hearings, all sorts of things. There's a lot of financial scandals that are just waiting to be ripped open. And that's to say nothing, of course, about the Epstein files. Put that off to the side for a minute. So that's what's going on domestically. And I think Trump really wanted to get a win with this war in Iran. And as we saw from the New York Times leaks, Danny, that it confirmed what we already knew, and that's that the whole war was a ham-fisted sales pitch by Benjamin Netanyahu. It came to Washington around the sort of second week of February and basically lorded over everybody, and they all treated him like a king. And he basically gave a dodgy, fraudulent sales pitch on pretty much every aspect of this war and what was going to be expected. None of it turned out to be true. The intelligence was fake, which also begs the question of where was Tulsi Gabbard among all of this? She seemed to want the war to happen. She certainly didn't speak up against all the fake intelligence that Israel has been, by the way, for the last year, but especially in February, was stovepiping fake intelligence into the U.S. system right onto the desk of Donald Trump. Joe Kent, luckily, we had a conscientious whistleblower come forward in Joe Kent, who revealed what was really going on behind the scenes and why we went to war on behalf of Israel. But still, nothing from the rest of the cabinet. Of course, they'll have to show up later when it's more convenient for them politically. So that's what's going on domestically. Internationally, I think all those headlines you showed, Danny, are kind of an admission that, while you can brag about all your sort of accomplishments in terms of eliminating this many boats and this many missile launchers and devastating Iran's infrastructure, like these are some sort of great victories, or the pain you've inflicted on the Iranian society. Again, some great victory. I'm not sure. They think it's a tactical victory in the U.S. They also think it's just a strategic victory. But the problem is when you have amateurs running big institutions, like let's say the Pentagon, it's got a $1.5 trillion budget right now, and you have somebody running it that's not even, Pete Hegseth is not even qualified to lead a platoon in the United States military. He was kicked out of the DC National Guard, all sorts of personal problems, alcoholism, and the rest of it. Okay, his rap sheet is unbelievable. How on earth was he even confirmed for that position? Well, the Israel lobby instructed U.S. senators to vote for his confirmation. They wanted a religious ideologue who had a compromised past, because Israel knows that if you can promote somebody with a very bad resume and somebody who is fighting off scandals behind them, they will do absolutely whatever they're instructed to do when put in that position, because it's almost like they've been given a miracle, rescue for their life and their career. And that's why they chose Hegseth. They wanted to find somebody who was unqualified, who had a lot of personal scandals, big scandals, by the way, the types of scandals in terms of sexual misconduct or alcoholism or fraud with regards to, or bankrupting previous charities that he worked for, Veterans for Freedom. I mean, all of these sort of charities went pretty much bankrupt while Hegseth was at the helm. Now, whether that was his fault or not, he was in charge. So someone has to sort of cop responsibility for that. And then there's the payouts to the, out of court settlements with the women, the children out of wedlock. It's a disaster. This is the last person you'd want to put, right, in charge of the Pentagon. And they did. And they instructed U.S. senators to vote for him, and they all capitulated because they got the call from IPAC or their IPAC handler. Vote for Pete Hegseth. That goes for the other positions as well. You have a lot of other unqualified people who got confirmed. And it's a disaster. And how do we get to this point of this sort of non-existent ceasefire this week? Is because with the rank amateur of Pete Hegseth and all the gung-ho invoking God over Easter weekend and all this other stuff, what did they do? They tried to mount some major operation to basically snatch and grab enriched uranium out of Isfahan in Iran. And that's not what the U.S. press ran with. They did report on the briefing, but they didn't say the operation happened. Instead, the press pivoted to this Jessica Lynch rescued pilot sort of mythology, good American story, feel-good story we can all rally around. But that's not what happened. And the information has come out. The U.S. Suffered record losses in the sort of last 50 years for lost aircraft during combat operations. So what happened was a botched special forces raid. So this was Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump's Jimmy Carter moment. This was their big Jimmy Carter moment. This is the thing the Republicans constantly castigate Jimmy Carter and the Democrats because of the failed hostage rescue attempt in 1980 during that election cycle, Carter versus Reagan. And here we have worse than Carter, way worse. At least Jimmy Carter was trying to do something honorable and probably legal, although he failed for various reasons. This was a completely illegal, not well thought out operation, totally gung-ho and cocksure by Hegseth. You can see they were probably high on God knows what when they all got together and said, this is a great idea. Let's just throw, a couple hundred U.S. special forces and unlimited amount of resources. So what it looks like is what started off as a pilot rescue, apparently. They quickly utilized the forces they had in place to basically rescue him and somehow use it as cover for this snatch and grab. It's uncertain, but it does look like the U.S. stepped into a trap set by Iran in Isfahan, and they lost a couple of C-130s. There's another C-130 likely that was used to exfiltrate troops. So anyway, the bottom line is that it went FUBAR. So with the good cover up by the U.S. military, Pete Hegseth is more or less closed reporting for the Pentagon. In fact, there's a court order basically saying what he's doing is unlawful by not allowing the press access to the Pentagon, first time in history. Okay. So they're saying, Trump's saying it's a national security issue. We can't allow the press to have open access, free access to what we're doing with the Pentagon. All that's going on. So Trump went absolutely mental. That's when his tantrum, threatening civilizational annihilation of the Iranians, came on the heels of his Jimmy Carter debacle. Total botched failure, massive amount of losses, and they covered it up. And that led to the tantrum, and then he put an 8 p.m. deadline on it. So they better do something, otherwise we're going to annihilate Iran. And later on the following day, 8 p.m. deadline. And what they did is to meet his 8 p.m. deadline, he wasn't willing to go through with civilizational annihilation, partly because of the pushback, the backlash politically, in not just in the U.S., internationally, was immense. And so he saw this deal, this 10-point deal by the Iranians that had been on the table,
Yeah.
and
Long time.
previous iterations of it have been on the table for a while. It's Danny, it's like Ukraine. The Russian the Russian list of demands hasn't changed at all in 4 years, and the same thing with Iran. They have more or less the same demands. So you don't need to go digging to find it. And they said that in Trump's story was the way the White House tried to spin it was, look, the Iranians have capitulated. They're begging us for a ceasefire. Look, they've given us a 10-point plan. And initially the U.S. said, well, we'll use that as the basis for talks. We'll use that as the basis for talks. And then all hell broke loose with Israel, because Israel, you see all the Israeli pundits, Mark Levine, Netanyahu's office, everybody they're going wild. They're saying, why has not Israel's not been consulted about this ceasefire? What ceasefire? So Israel does what Israel normally does, which is use any kind of a distraction to go and basically take advantage of it by doing a bombing run, or massacring Palestinians, or massacre the West Bank, massacre South Lebanon. And they used it to do 100+ bombing raids in a 15-minute window, hitting Beirut, hitting Christian areas, hitting areas, even neighborhoods I lived in, just off the Corniche. These are not Hezbollah areas. So anyway, they just went wild, Israel, and bombed Lebanon and Beirut, South Lebanon. And so and this forced J.D. Vance to have to deny that a ceasefire in Lebanon was part of Iran's overall ceasefire deal. Of course it was. It's already been confirmed twice by Pakistan, by the Iranians themselves. And they made up a story. I think White House came up with a fake story that they were given a private list of demands somehow by, who knows, it could be a used car salesman who is Iranian, that's a friend of Steve Witkoff's, whoever Steve Witkoff claims he's been talking to, and relaying that to Trump, saying he's talking to the new regime. I mean, it was this government in exile. The whole thing is just a circus. It's become a clown show. And so this has led all sorts of fancy footwork and all sorts of dodging by the Trump administration. The bottom line, Danny, is that Iran has achieved a strategic victory, and the U.S. has been defeated strategically. And if they count civilian deaths and destroyed infrastructure and civilian life in Iran as some kind of a win by the U.S., if you touting that as a victory, then where are you as a country, really? So what they've lost is politically. Even Italy has backed off, and at the same time, the Pete Hegseth, the Trump administration, were attacking the Vatican, attacking the Catholic Church. So the Pope has weighed in, which is this is unprecedented. My whole life, as an Irish Catholic, I have never seen the church weigh in on wars. I was waiting for it during the whole Iraq debacle, and nothing happened in America. And suddenly we have this new American Pope who basically said no and rebuked Pete Hegseth, invoking Jesus, praying for the bombing of Iran, like this is some holy act. And then over Easter Sunday, Trump just doing the most sacrilegious statements and almost satanic rants about killing Iranians and destroying their civilization. And so this has created a schism now in American conservative politics. But it means that Meloni in Italy, no, if you're forcing the Italian leader to choose between the Vatican and MAGA, it's not a contest. So now the Italians are talking about opening up diplomatic relations with Tehran. Same time, Spain's talking about opening up a diplomatic mission in Tehran. And now Trump is threatening Spain. And look at the way this is going. This is a disaster. It's at home and away. They can't do anything right.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they're sending the Del Boy of diplomacy, Steve Witkoff, and his sidekick Rodney, Jared Kushner, off to Islamabad, with letting J.D. Vance get his feet wet finally, with some. Where are these negotiations going to go, Denny? They're going to go nowhere. Look at the past negotiations. They've all gone nowhere. Why? Because you cannot do these like, oh, I've got my list of demands, my maximalist lists, and we want all of this, and we're not going to accept any of yours. And if you don't succumb to us, we're going to punish you. We're going to bomb you. So I think that this is going to go nowhere. Another photo op for Witkoff, another failure, 0% chance of success, 0%. And then I fully expect Israel will start bombing Iran after, I don't know, a week, maybe two. Maybe if they get on the verge of some breakthrough, then you know it's guaranteed Israel will then attack some target in Iran. And then the United States will have to join in and support Israel. And then we'll be back to zero again. Why am I so cynical? Because I'm just looking at the past pattern of behavior. They failed in Ukraine with Russia for the same reason they can't do diplomacy. They're inept. They're not capable. Trump's style of negotiations, which is no concessions. You must get down on your knees and prostrate to me and my demands. Otherwise, we're going to punish you. That's not going to work with Iran. It didn't work with Russia. Iran's already priced this in now. They're going to go through the theater like the Russians go through the theater with the U.S., knowing full well that they just have to get down to business on the battlefield. And that's what Iran's going to do. And Trump this will be a slow, painful death for the Trump administration and for the American empire. We're watching it. We're watching the greatest train wreck of all time in slow motion.
It seems like the worse the train wreck gets, the more that Donald Trump posts on Truth Social. And what's so interesting about the point that you made about Iran's 10-point plan being out in the open for quite a while now is that we know Donald Trump is very active on social media. So it would seem that it's likely that Trump, as an individual himself, already knew what Iran wanted, let alone the fact that everybody knew what Iran wanted because it's been circulating for quite some time. But nevertheless, Patrick, we are getting Donald Trump's interpretations of reality every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. And here he says the Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using, in capitals, by the way, international waterways. The only reason they are alive today is to negotiate. This is how Donald Trump is talking amidst negotiations that I'm already hearing are going to be indirect. They won't be in the same room. We're already seeing the Trump administration from Vance and others say, well, we didn't agree to the demands that Iran put on the table to initiate the ceasefire with Pakistan as the mediator. And then this, international waterways, I guess he's referring to the Strait of Hormuz. And now we also have this just blatant threat toward the negotiators themselves. Oh, the only reason the Iranians are alive in the first place is to do this, is to negotiate, basically kiss our feet. I mean, this is the way that the Trump administration is talking. Probably at no other time in history of the United States has a sitting president just spoken like this in these kind of moments when everyone else is saying, this is not looking great for the United States. It truly is a quandary. What's your reaction to these comments?
Look, with all of the U.S. Faults and deep cardinal sins of the past, and there's just too many to mention, the sins of empire, there was always this air of decorum that they at least had to go through the motions diplomatically. What you have with the Trump administration is they're basically now have just sort of abandoned the high road, or even sort of the play acting of the high road, to opt for the gutter. And the gutter is where Israel resides. Israel resides in the gutter. They make threats. They assassinate any negotiators. If the Israelis are in negotiations, you can be sure they will try to kill the other side who's across the table. And they've done that already multiple times. And they'll even go so far, Israel, to announce they're going to kill any future negotiators, which they have done with Iran. Ali Larijani is an example. That's something Israel had threatened they were going to do, and they did it. So these gutter mafia tactics is where Trump is now. For some reason, he's just been out of pure sort of assimilation, has just become Israeli in that sense. So it doesn't reflect American traditions of diplomacy or negotiations, or at least America trying to act like an honest broker, even if they probably never were. But that's going to make it very difficult for the United States to sort of throw their weight around with other countries that do value decorum, that do think that agreements and negotiations and diplomacy is important, that are agreement capable. You have to remember, countries like China, India, Russia, these are agreement capable countries. Iran is agreement capable. So in international relations, we call those normative powers. Normative powers. So the international system, when you conceptualize it, it bends to the favor of normative powers. Why? Because other powers, be they sort of even top powers, not quite first tier, even second tier powers, they can bandwagon together under the assumption that who they're bandwagoning with is rational, is logical, and is agreement capable. That way, you can have a treaty, you can have a multilateral agreement, and these are the things that mark benchmarks of history of how things get done in the international system. If you have a rogue state, they're not a normative power. The international system will not bend in their favor. And so the United States is now in the category of a rogue state. Again, they're adopting the Israeli method, which is international gangsterism, zero-sum diplomacy, and punishing everybody, threatening to kill and killing, and all these other things, abandoning all pretense of past agreements or treaties. That's where the U.S. is now. It's going to, in all honesty, I would say I don't think America can recover from this, even if they had a new administration in 2026 or J.D. Vance takes over as president. They're not going to recover from this because they've done this at the worst possible time. They've done it during the ascendancy of multipolarism. They've done this during the ascendancy of BRICS. And the United States has sacrificed all of its positions and its previous footholds and the things that make the U.S. A world power. It's basically sacrificed them at the altar of Israel. I'll give you a perfect example. There's a tweet by Joe Kent regarding NATO. You've heard all this rhetoric of Trump saying NATO's not pulling their weight. They didn't come to our aid in the Straits of Hormuz, and we bailed them out with Ukraine. I mean, it's just a stupid argument by Trump because the U.S. started the Ukraine civil war in 2014 that led to this war anyway. But let's just put that aside. So what is all this talk about, like leaving NATO, the slagging off NATO? And I always wondered, none of this made sense because we know NATO is the foundation of U.S. power projection through half of the globe. I mean, that's how the U.S. Is able to get around Congress and do things unilaterally under the fake banner of NATO. It's the greatest tool ever for U.S. imperialism after the Second World War. And it's also a great protection racket because they can sort of, like the mafia, and make the Europeans buy tons of weapons and pretend they're going to protect them from an enemy that the U.S. created, in this case, Russia. But where is this all coming from with Hormuz? I mean, it's like reverse Article 5 mentality by Trump. I mean, even by Trump standards, it's bizarre. And then I'm thinking to myself, and then Joe Kent tweets this out just yesterday. He said, no, this talk of NATO is to withdraw the U.S. Either temporarily or permanently so that Israel can attack Turkey. Now, that makes perfect sense because it follows a pattern of the U.S. abandoning its leverage, abandoning its positions that gave it power all for Israel. And so, ignoring and going against U.S. interests in favor of Israeli interests, and that's I think of the best rational explanation that makes sense. And so again, imagine that, just basically ejecting NATO for Israel to attack Turkey, so that you don't have any obligations to defend Turkey. I mean, listen, Danny, if Israel attacks Turkey today, what would the U.S. push back on Israel? Would anyone in Europe? Would they?
No, I mean, this has been a historical pattern, is try to goad Turkey into a relationship, and then when things get a little hard or Turkey wants something, like, no, how about you just stay where you are, kind of thing. And I feel like it would be the same thing here. I think it would be even worse in the sense that the United States wouldn't even want to pay attention to something like that because that's an extremely messy situation that the U.S. has no capacity to really handle. It would be really difficult for the U.S. to navigate that disaster.
So who
Definitely.
would come to Turkey's defense? There's only four countries. It's going to be China.
Yeah.
It's going to be Russia. It's going to be possibly Pakistan, India, and I don't know. That's it. Maybe Brazil. Maybe it's the BRICS countries. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's amazing, but that's the reality. And think about it, because Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli PM, has come out publicly and said Turkey is the new Iran. He said that publicly. That was a very powerful statement that he made. And that's like a warning shot right there. And let me tell you, when Israel fires warning shots, you better pay attention, because that means they're coming. And if they're allowed to, anyway. So if the U.S. can't restrain them, I mean, that's going to fundamentally alter geopolitics, and very dangerous. And world wars have been started over the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. Arguably, that's the deeper foundation of World War One, was to prevent Germany from allying with the Ottoman Empire, and then also getting control of the oil fields in what is currently Iraqi Kurdistan, Mosul and Kirkuk, and so forth. And so the British and their allies mobilized to prevent that from happening. But that east meets west, that pivot point, Turkey is the ultimate geopolitical pivot. And if Israel is allowed to do that, and that's to say nothing about what would happen in Cyprus, and then you have a major catastrophe on your hands that would be very difficult to contain. So right now, looking at that, Iran's looking like the normative power. So I think geopolitics will bend in favor of Iran in the long term, if they can survive, if they could keep the Straits of Hormuz not closed, but under their management, or whatever. It's probably going to be under their management for the foreseeable future, but closed to U.S. allies and to U.S. business for, I would say, give it another month. And right now, the inflation, the economy in the U.S., it's
Incredible.
not good. It's
No.
really not good. But hey, oil prices dropped a little bit with this announcement, and the stock market went up. And there was somebody put a massive bet on another one, and billions of dollars were made on the back of Trump's announcement. So someone's doing okay.
On the one hand, your point on the United States empire even doing things against its own interest, like against the empire's interest, by getting into conflagrations like the one with Iran that only could lead to bad outcomes because they wanted to preserve, strengthen, give impetus to Israel as a whatever people's theories is why Israel is so important to the U.S., but there are many reasons. And so to do that, and then you have on this other side, many people say, well, the U.S. can afford to lose the war in Iran because there will be people getting rich off of it, especially the LNG oil corporations. However, it seems to me, though, as this war has come to this point, this inflection point, that it seems like everybody has a gripe with what happened to the war in Iran in the establishment, except for the Trump administration, which says we won, we won, we won. Everything is okay. There seems like there was pressure everywhere, coming through the mainstream media, coming through back channels, that was getting out of control. And now we're seeing reports that the consequences of this, whether it's Saudi Arabia having 1.3 million barrels of oil be completely wiped off per day, wiped off of their production capacity,
Yeah.
or whether it's the fact that as you just cited, the costs to the global economy is going to put huge pressure on people for the foreseeable future, even if there's no more shooting, which is not a
Yes.
guarantee.
Well, the headline you showed earlier says it all, which is that Iran's won and everyone else is lost. That's the way it looks. Now, that reminds me of something else. Who else has won? Who's won with the Ukraine proxy war against Russia? NATO's proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. Who are the winners besides the military-industrial complex? Everyone else is, relatively speaking, a loser. Europe's a massive loser. U.S. gas is a winner. Okay, U.S. oil and gas, they're winners. There's a few other potential winners here. Qatar is no longer benefiting from it after this debacle. So look at this. Now, this has similarities. It's almost this identical pattern to the Iranian war because uh, with Ukraine, that's the proxy. And anytime there's any breakthrough of negotiations, Ukraine will suddenly go and do a drone strike and attack Moscow, try to assassinate Putin, kill some Russians, or hit a Russian oil refinery, and so forth. And this is what they've done. In fact, Ukraine's been so busy on that front in the recent months. Russia has been forced to put a freeze on the export of petroleum, i.e., refined gasoline, because they're afraid that their market supplies might be unstable because their production capacity is way down. Why? Export capacity is down because of Ukrainian drone attacks. So anywhere between 30 and 40% of Russian export capacity is compromised as a result of what Ukraine has been doing. That proxy has been busy behind the scenes, and the U.S. and the European they can always do a good cop bad cop illusion there and say, oh, look, it's not us, it's those feisty Ukrainians, and we can't tell them what to do. They're really pissed off at the Russians, so we'll just have to accept that. The net result is more petroleum, more gas is taken off the global market. That's the first thing. So same thing with Israel. Israel, in a sense, is playing that Ukrainian spoiler role with this war in Iran, and the U.S. playing this good cop, bad cop, pretending that Israel and the U.S. are separate in terms of their military coordination, intelligence, and all the rest of it, when clearly there's very little distance between them, and so very little daylight between them. And so Israel can then stymie any negotiations at any time, either through a target assassination or some kind of a rogue airstrike or bombing a school or something in Iran. Who knows? So you're guaranteed that on both of those fronts, both of those major fronts, there's going to be no progress in diplomacy, no negotiated political settlement at all. It's just going to be a slow degradation of the situation, and then Russia and Iran, in this case, will be forced to take up their own sort of priorities and secure their own security perimeter and deal with their own interests outside of negotiations on the battlefield or whatever with deterrence. But the end result is the same. And if you look at it, by Israel striking Iran and knowing that Iran was going to hit back against Israel and U.S. bases in the region, and then Israel striking the South Pars gas field, knowing that Iran would retaliate against the Gulf states, more oil and gas has been taken off the global market. So you have all the oil and gas on the Russian side taken out, all the Persian Gulf taken off, and this has been very strategic. And you could argue whether Iran is playing into the U.S. broader geostrategic hand by doing this, or the Israeli hand. And that's an argument you can have, and there's not a clear answer there, quite frankly, because Iran has to do what it has to do. But the main beneficiary is, and this goes back to a very old neocon plan. This is right back to the days of the clean break document, where if they could throttle global petroleum, then they would be able to use that to contain China. They would be able to throttle peer competitors. And then the U.S. would be able to ride out the storm with their great proven oil and gas reserves, announced oil and gas reserves that they could then, and they are going to benefit from a raise in price. That's Trump's base, is big oil, big gas, big fracking, and they're going to benefit from it. Even if we all lose, Daniel, even if we all lose, and even if there's a food shortage of ammonia, urea, agricultural fertilizer, and that causes a global food crisis, big oil and big gas in America will benefit because nobody is sending drones to attack our refineries in Texas or elsewhere. And so we'll be able to, and this makes the Venezuela play much more understandable in that sense, as that was a stepping stone. That's the hardcore neocon strategy of throttling global oil and gas, and then riding out the storm with U.S. muscle. That was one of their basic core plans. Now they would have said that's crazy back in the early 2000s, but they're doing it 25 years later. They're actually doing it with Israel's help. And so, is this going to work or not? It's a very big gamble by Israel and a very big gamble by the U.S. It could destroy the United States as an imperial power. It could destroy Israel as a
Mm.
colonial settler state project, the Zionist project. It could cost them the Greater Israel Project. Who
Mm.
knows? So, my last question would be, does Israel care about the Trump administration or the Republican Party? Does the United States really care about Israel and the Netanyahu project? Do either of these two parties care about each other really when you drill down to it? And I
No.
think that's an interesting question and an even more interesting answer.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's a lot of complexity to a conclusion of they're using each other. And I always say they're two they are two cheeks on the same animal's behind. They really do to kind of paraphrase George Galloway, they really do walk in tandem, and they do uh they do have contestation, conflict, antagonisms. But at the same time, yeah, this idea of them actually caring for each other, being allies with each other, I don't think that's ever really been the case. I think there's a deep, as you said, there's a real deep complexity to why they behave, why each party behaves the way it does, why it looks like capitulation from the United States on what sometimes, why it looks like sometimes Trump can call up Netanyahu and say do this and he'll do it. I think there's a lot of give and take, and sometimes, I guess, in the world that they live in, Epstein Island world, maybe some flogging, abuse, that kind of thing going on, where they scratch each other's back and sometimes scratch too hard, that kind of thing. So it's a real dirty game. And then finally, Patrick, when you were talking about the sabotage of the oil fields, because Saudi Arabia, and maybe just in a few minutes react to this, Saudi Arabia named Iran, and Iran has hit strategic sites against Saudi Arabia throughout the war, but they're pretty strategic about it, and usually understand how much they're hitting, how much damage is going to be done if they hit it, as much as close as possible. But what Saudi Arabia is reporting is devastating consequences that many have noted, as you just noted. Yeah, Israel has a huge interest in hitting some of these sites, like in Kuwait and the UAE and now Saudi Arabia. And I thought that the reason why I think China rallied Pakistan to step it up. Everyone's saying that the U.S. chose, but China and Pakistan are much deeper friends than even the U.S. and Pakistan. And I believe China was looking at the situation like, wow, the entire global energy market might be destroyed if the U.S. carries out what it was going to say, what it said it was going to do, even if a little, even if it was they didn't have the capacity to wipe everything, the civilization away, even if they just went to decimate Iran's oil industry. And then Iran, of course, returned in kind to decimate the whole Gulf energy system, turn out the lights, all of that. Then you have a major global catastrophe on their hands. And I think China came in and said, Iran's winning. How about we use this disastrous opportunity to try to push with Iran what it wants. That's how I see it. Other people are seeing it as China is controlling Iran and all this. I don't see that. I actually see this as more of a pragmatic. Yeah, this disaster was the bluff of the century, and now it's time to see if we can take advantage of it. And if you can't, well, it's just going to be what it was before and go right back to it. But your final reactions on this?
Well, the thing you got to know, I personally think Pakistan self-deployed on this, and I'll tell you why. There is a deep political, and I think also a sort of kindred spiritual connection between Pakistan and Iran. They're both Islamic republics. Okay, so they have so in terms of the DNA of those two countries, politically and spiritually, even though it's different in terms of what branch of Islam that each country practices the majority, but there's a substantial Shia population in Pakistan, and they're very politically active. And they have taken a lot of the core tenets of the Iranian uh, uh, Islamic Revolution. It had a big impact on Pakistan political life, and in many ways validated the Pakistani project. That's the thing. And so when Israel starts threatening Pakistan, which they did in the last couple of months, they were talking about a nuclear armed Pakistan cannot be allowed to exist. Israel will not be safe with an Islamic country with nuclear weapons. So I think Pakistan is looking at this as an existential issue. If Iran falls, they're next. It's as simple as that. So, while they have support of China and they're an important economic partner with China and with the Belt and Road, Pakistan is a major partner with Belt and Road. But Iran is also a major partner in terms of the Middle Corridor projects and the future of east-west economic overland and sea combination routes. Russia and China, they're very much invested in Iran. Iraq is also an important part of that too, and so is Turkey, for that matter. And Europe is going to be the ultimate beneficiary of that if it's allowed to happen. But to try to tell that to the current European leadership, and you'll be way too far ahead for them. So they're playing Yahtzee, and the East are playing chess on this. So we can't help Europe at the moment. But so I think Pakistan's asserted itself. Also, Pakistan's very, very tight with Saudi Arabia. Those two are probably, in terms of leadership, in terms of national dialogue, in terms of cooperation, they're probably two of the tightest allies in the entire region. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, both relying on each other, one for relying on finance, the other relying on the other's defense. So Saudi's hedging its bets into the future as well, and views Pakistan as a loyal ally there, and so that's also in the background as well. So I think Trump's comments about MBS kissing his one of his cheeks of his what,
Mhm.
that is probably going to be the death knell for U.S. Saudi relations. And again, Trump with his big mouth, I don't know. I could say a lot of things right now to describe Donald Trump and his little sidekick, JD Vance, who's like kind of a
Right.
finger puppet, version of Trump.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
bizarre, but I
It
could
is.
say that they're this, they're that, and that Trump's advisors are low IQ or whatever. There's lots of things you could say. Certainly, they're not they're not exuding a lot of confidence. If you look at the results of what's happened, it's just a disaster for America, for the region, for the global economy. So out of this, a lot of people are going to emerge as voices of sanity, and I think this is huge. Say two major European countries, G one G7 country or Italy, and then Spain, two NATO countries wanting to open up diplomatic missions in Tehran. Listen, and now they're looking at Russia through the lens, comparing Russia to the United States now, and saying, why does Russia have to be our mortal enemy? There's a lot of people in Europe having this conversation now.
Mhm.
Like what's actually wrong with Russia? What did they do that was? I mean, look at the United States. If we can't mobilize that kind of anger and sanctions and full spectrum punishment for the U.S. or Israel in this case, because they're inflicting pain on us now economically in Europe, then what are we doing? So that same conversation's going to happen. So you could see some breaking of ranks in Europe. I think it's already begun. If that happens at the Brussels level, this is going to be a big problem for Washington.
Right. Well, Patrick, I want to make sure everyone knows to go to the video description so they can find you 21st Century Wire, YouTube, and your Substack there. Everybody hit the like button. That will keep this video going well after you're finished. Thanks, Patrick, so much for joining me today.
Yep, and just a quick shout, if people can help, just hit our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, because we are so heavily throttled. We have been on that platform for like 10 years. We've been through the censorship gauntlet on that. So any help you can give us for visibility and that help the algorithmic suppression is so greatly appreciated, and we really appreciate it.
Great. Yes, everyone, you heard him. All right. Well, that's it for the show. See you again soon, everyone. Bye-bye.